Smoke still rose in thin eddies from the fires smouldering below the rubble. Emergency teams had long since been dismissed, and the demolition teams had taken over. I leaned back on my bike, eyes fixed on one tower far and away, one of the few I had seen the inside of. I had called Fia as soon as I left the warehouse. She was packing up anything of value we owned and getting underground. Then I had called Reva. Her and Hercule were still an hour away or so, but Hercule had some good news. He had access to a safe house, of sorts, that belonged to his uncle. If Shaky did turn us in, Sierra didn't know about Hercule or our connection there. His uncle's place was our best bet for somewhere to gather and formulate a plan. And I had a plan. Well, most of one. Well, the start of one. I passed on the address to Fia. Now I was just waiting. Waiting for the call from Hercule to say they had arrived. I reached into the storage compartment under the seat of the Hellion and pulled out the AI Extremis drive. I turned it over in my hands. I hoped I was right about what was in here. AI were dangerous, but they were also easy to manipulate if you knew what their triggers were. This one would be pissed. I just had to make sure it directed that energy at the right person. Before that, though, I needed to try and make contact with the only person who I knew might be able to give me an edge in this fight. I just hoped they were real. The safe house that Hercule had been given the keys to was a safe apartment. A safe penthouse apartment. "This is your uncle's idea of laying low?" I asked as I looked down at the plush carpet and then back up at the gilded light fixtures, an expensive open-plan living space on the 80th floor. "I never said it was laying low, I said it was safe." I couldn't fault him there. I had scanned the place, and it was a veritable bomb shelter. It would take some serious apocalyptic shit to get in here if you hit the lockdown button. Fia had gotten here, safely. Reva and her had set up a kind of portable office space in the centre of the living room. She was nestled in the thick plush carpet with her headphones pumping out Bad Man by Disturbed. Oddly fitting, given the situation. She was putting together a something to allow us to communicate with the AI. I wasn't about to expose myself to that without something akin to the cyberware version of bulletproof glass between us. Reva was giving all our weapons and kit a good going over, checking all functions, counting ammo. "I'm just going to make a call," Hercule said, dropping into a very comfortable-looking couch. "To who?" I asked, suspiciously. "Uncle Baelish, if this shit goes south, I want someone to know what we're doing here, what we're working towards. Try and tear this bitch down." His eyes began to light up with the sign of an internal menu being overlaid on his vision. "Even if it does take the old goat a decade, at least it's a chance." I nodded in consent. I didn't think Hercule's uncle would ever be able to achieve much if we failed, but there was no good to be had from voicing that thought. If we failed, Sierra would be too powerful to be challenged much, if at all. I sat down next to Reva and picked up a pistol. She had it disassembled for cleaning. "Thanks again for sticking with me." She smiled, leant in, and gave me a kiss. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere. Ride or die, baby." I chuckled. "You really think this is gonna work?" I shook my head. I have no idea. I've been up against people like her before. Not from our side of the fence, though. It was always another country. It was always someone else's home, someone else's problem. And I had the might of our government at my back. "You do now. You're a federal agent." I can't call this in. Shaky is right. This is so big. She's so high up the chain now. Who knows how far her influence reaches, and if she makes governor? I left the implications unsaid. We took a moment to work with our hands. Something simple, something fully in our control. We finished cleaning the weapons and reassembled them. I laid my gun down next to hers on the coffee table. I leant back, letting the cushions engulf me. Reva leant in, nestling her head on my shoulder, enjoying a brief moment of us just being us. She smelled like sweat, oil, and her own natural scent. Her hand traced a pattern on my knee. "Her family's pulled this kind of thing before, you know." I looked at her, not hiding my surprise. "What?" "Fia dug it up before you got here. That's how they became so powerful back in Europe. They incited chaos and civil war over a series of radically motivated murders. It blew up from that to a 10-year civil war. They all but wiped out any greenskins in the country in the process. Then they stepped in and united the masses, taking over the country nice and tidy. All this came out years later, but by then they were the ruling family. No one was going to say a word against them. 10 years. Well, she's moving a lot faster this time. I don't think so. If she distributed the books, headhunted the stranger, if she was the one that set up the coven in the garden, together with how long she's been here in the city building up her influence and involvement, she's been planning this for years. That clinched it. I couldn't take her on. Not with what I had here, not with this scant array of tools. I needed an edge. I got to my feet. Well, no point putting off the inevitable. What? It's time I had a little chat with someone. She narrowed her eyes, then they went wide with realization. I gave her a nervous smile. If I go silent, don't panic. It probably means it's working. Last time I had communicated with my father, it had been completely by accident. I had been straight out of combat into a coma. I wasn't about to try and replicate that scenario. This time, I was going to have to be considerably more relaxed. In truth, I had no clue how I had done it the first time. I didn't have much of a clue how I was going to achieve it this time. But I was about to go headfirst into battle with forces that were greater than myself. I needed to be able to pull moves that had only been pulled once before. The book had been a bust. We didn't have time to decipher it. Even if I had, I couldn't be sure I would have gotten it right. Cipher glyphs were specific to each of us. If the cipher who had crafted that text had used their own glyphs, well, I'd need to be an expert in languages and computer code. But the book wasn't just an instruction manual. It was an amplifier, and I could feel that as soon as I held it. But if I could just figure out how to unlock it, if I could pull off feats of magic akin to what I'd done in the garden, I just needed the right kind of power source to back me up. I'd found some space in the master bedroom. I sat myself down on the carpet, cross-legged, shifted my weight, scratched my nose, shifted my weight again. Okay, maybe the bed. Stretching out over the lush, soft mattress, I tried again to get comfortable. It didn't work. I was too tired and the bed was too soft. It just made me want to crash out. In the end, I settled for the couch, sitting upright, head propped up by an ergonomic adjustable headrest. Fancy. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and descended into my own personal cyberspace. The top layers were my personal operating programs, stuff like my comms, my HUD, the other superficial stuff. Then there was a layer that was my own base magic. A tangled web of code and hieroglyphics. All of this was indeed manifested in what you could conceivably call levels of reality. This wasn't how everyone saw things. When I was invading other people's network systems, it was almost always like a traditional computer menu layout. But in my own space, I had my own organizational system. I needed to keep the more magical side of things tucked away and separate. I had never tried to delve into understanding the lower levels. Much of what was there had become a knotted mess of magic that my father had always told me was the core of what a cipher was. It was our mind, our soul, our very consciousness. You didn't meddle with that. It was like trying to do brain surgery on yourself while you were still awake. Who would dare risk their own life and sanity by tampering with that level of code, except maybe a dying man? I have my suspicions now, though, about how all this operated and how I had arrived at that empty space with my father. We don't find out until it's too late. That was what he had said. I was about to take a big risk. Maybe I should have kissed Reva goodbye just in case. I took in the sprawling matrix of yellow light and descended deep into my own mind. I reached out, mentally, and feeling for a connection. I was looking for something that had the feel of a live connection, something that pulsed with my current thoughts and mood. I was groping for my conscious link. I found it. A column of code, not at the center of the mess, but still hard to miss. I reached out with a thought, grasping it mentally, praying I was right. I pulled the plug. This time, I didn't waste time figuring out where I was. I knew exactly where and how. I was all alone, though, in an empty grey space. I focused and manifested a floor and a blue sky. It still felt unreal, but at least it wasn't creepy. Dad! Dad! I called out at the top of my lungs. Dad, I know you're out there. Still nothing. This is no time to play the distant father. Shift your non-corporeal ass. Give me a sec. I'm not a fucking light switch. I actually jumped and turned around to see my father seated in a comfy chair, picking at his nails. He didn't look up. This isn't as easy as I make it look, you know. Not funny. He looked up and grinned. It was a little funny. I didn't have time for this shit. Last time, 2 weeks had felt like an hour. This time, who knew how fast time was flying out there in the real world while he dicked about in here? You can control it, son. It's all up to you. I ignored the comment. You're dead. He started to clap slowly. You always were the perceptive one. I sighed. You're dead, but you're here, with information and thoughts of your own. I have no way of knowing. How'd you do it? He shrugged. I don't really know. Try and give me an educated guess, why don't you? He cocked an eyebrow and relaxed back into his chair. Okay. So last thing I remember, I was dying, coughing up a lifetime of tar and regretting not having more sex. Charming. So, I figure, if I'm going to go out, I may as well break my one cardinal rule. See what lays beneath the red, deep down in the sea of code and glyphs. You started to deconstruct your own mind. It wasn't a question. He nodded in grim confirmation. You have to remember, we're not normal beings. I strongly suspect we were created. An anomaly made by something far more powerful than what resides on Earth. But I digress. I figured if we have code, then it can be copied and pasted, to use an old computing term. You copied yourself and uploaded your consciousness into another system? I couldn't believe it. He smiled like he'd played a joke on the world. It took some hunting to find a server big enough to house me without anyone noticing. Then I spent weeks looking for a link to you. Why? He threw his hands in the air. What do you mean, why? You're my son, and the only other cipher I care a whit for. I wanted to come and share this epiphany, and boast a little. Why not just tell me last time? Why riddle me this and that with vague explanations? You needed to be ready to hear it. You needed to arrive at some kind of realization on your own. Or it could have snapped your mind. At least that was what I was afraid of. Or even worse, I was scared you would try it for yourself. I started to pace. His eyes followed me lazily. He sat there like he had all the time in the world. He did. So if we're just code in a shell, we can manipulate that code, like you did, reprogram it. I stopped to look at him for confirmation. In theory. I decided to offer my first piece of information in return. I have a book. He held up a finger, forestalling me. Let me guess. Small, black, all in code? Yeah. How'd you know? Now he looked deadly serious, and seriously worried. Don't go there, son. That book is cancer. How the hell do you know about the books? He squinted in confusion. There's more than one? Well, yeah. There's one for each discipline of magic as far as we can tell. Don't know anything about that, but the Cyphers Grimoire, that book has sent many a better man than you or I insane. Well, that fucking tracks, given how the last owner ended up. You haven't tried to use it, have you? I shook my head. No, I was hoping to, though. He settled into his storyteller tone of voice and pulled his legs up to sit cross-legged on the chair. Okay, you need to hear this, so get comfortable. He waited for me to sit, or something. I continued to stand. Okay, as you know, I did a lot of research into us as a species. I was always looking for something to give us an edge in our work, to crank up the power, enhance our reach. I had heard of arch ciphers, but they were so rare, and the more I dug, the more I found. All of them had reached their heights, and ended prematurely. But here's the thing, they all had one thing in common. Their power was derived from a source they only hinted at, and I found out what it was. He smiled like he was divulging a magnificent secret. The Cyphers Grimoire, a book that has no origin that can be found. It's existed for as long as we have. I thought back to the book we had found in the Witch's Coven. It didn't look that old, if it was of the same origin. But if they were magical, who knew how the magic would affect them? But you never found it. He shook his head. Nah, no chance. It disappeared from all knowledge when an elven mage snatched it up after the last cipher fell somewhere in Europe. I got sick of standing and conjured a seat of my own, dropping into it, feeling as exhausted here as I did in the real world. I'm up against it, Dad. I need more power, more control. I need more time. Well, that book, it can lend you power, but like any shortcut, it'll cost you. I put the book out of my mind for the moment. Can you at least teach me more control? Ah, yes, and no. Well, mostly no. What do you mean, no? You managed this. I motioned towards his non-corporeal form. It's not worth the risk, mate. Rewriting your own code. You're asking for trouble. I was already dying. What was the worst thing that could happen? But you just said it was like altering any program. Yeah, except you could be left as a vegetable if you get it wrong. Sometimes you gotta break a few eggs. No, not when it's your brain. You don't think I can handle it, I said, petulantly. It was probably the most immature I'd sounded in years. He shook his head. It's not that. If I was going to put money on anyone rewriting their own code, it would be you. It has to be worth the risk, I said sullenly. Fuck off. You're turning off the inhibitors, overclocking yourself. I might not have a choice. You don't know what's been happening. I know I don't want you to kill yourself. Not like this. Silence hung in the air for a long time. I weighed my options. Look, I gotta go, kid. I looked up, confused. What? You heard, I gotta go. But I motioned to the empty space around us. You're just here, aren't you? He scrunched up his face in thought. I knew that look. It was his I can't be bothered explaining it. I always found that very patronizing. I'm not really here. I'm in a server on the other side of the country, trying to keep my head down. It takes a lot of power to project myself all this way. So that's it. Don't kill myself, don't read the book, no help, no hints. He stood up, dusting off his jeans as though they were real. Sorry, mate. We locked eyes. There was something there. Concern. Good luck, eh? Be careful. And with that, he blinked out of existence. Great, just great, I yelled into the empty air. A lot of help you are, you old ghost. I found myself panting with anger. I looked around me and realized there was something I hadn't considered when I first contemplated coming here. Ah, crap. How do I get out of here? It had taken me a little while, but I eventually figured out how to get out. It was just a matter of relaxing into it and willing myself to wake up. Now I floated, for want of a better word, above a sea of yellow glyphs and code. My mind, my magic, my very essence. He had said this was a bad idea. Well, it's been that kind of year, and if I wasn't going to risk myself to avenge thousands of dead, I didn't deserve my badge. So now the real question was, where the fuck did I even start? I didn't think I had much time. I didn't know if Shaky would raise the alarm. I didn't know what was waiting for me when I finally decided to confront her. I didn't even have a plan of how to get to her. But like any overwhelming task, break it down into small, achievable units. I dropped, sinking into the yellow code, letting my mental senses reach out and try and identify the multitude of different columns. I was going to have to try and do this by feel, and hope that I didn't unplug my breathing or something. Well, here goes everything. My eyes opened. It was dark, but not the darkness of blindness, thank God. I'd forgotten to leave a light on, and night had fallen. I checked over my basic motor functions. Everything seemed to be working. I wasn't in a coma. I could stand, breathe. That was two of the big ones. I just hoped I'd done enough to make a difference. I got up and walked over to the window, blinking from the bright lights of the city below. We were so high up that the world could almost be considered a different plane of existence. I took a deep breath, slow, measured. My Cyphers sight overlaid my natural vision, and the neon-lit city, already bright, erupted in colours. I had always been able to see the data streams, power sources, the heartbeat of the city that was its power grid. But now, it was like I'd needed glasses my whole life and not known. I had been acting on instinct, as I had attempted to rewrite my own mind. At least in this, I had succeeded. I reached out with my mind. I could feel the energy signatures of so many. I couldn't control them, I didn't have that kind of power, but I could sense them. I was more aware, more in tune. I might not have the power, but I had control. And reach. My mind linked with a tower 2 blocks away, and I bared my teeth. I breathed in. The lights on a whole floor flared bright. I breathed out. They went dark. Gorgeous. But that was only half the problem solved. Power, that was what I really needed. My father had said it was dangerous. That way lay madness. But maybe just for one night. My thought was cut short as I heard a knock on the door. It was Hercule. "You awake?" "Yeah." The door opened a crack. He poked his head in, looking anxious. It was bizarre to see that expression on the big guy's face. "Oh, hey, your sister has something to show you." I blinked away my other sight and settled my mind back into the here and now. Back in the living room, the other 3 were crowded around the AI extremis drive. It was modified though. Fia had been tinkering. Reva scooted to one side and I sat down on the couch next to her. Fia was on the floor fiddling with some cables. "What have you been doing?" She smiled from ear to ear. "I made a thing." "Clearly. What is it? Or am I going to regret asking that question?" Hercule lay a hand on my shoulder. "Your sister is a genius. If she ever wants a real job, I'll hire her in a heartbeat." I rolled my eyes, and he threw Fia a cheeky wink. "You pay me enough, and I'll consider it." Okay. What am I looking at?" Fia patted the top of the matte black box that had been added to with what looked like a screen of some sort, and some other junk. "This is an old school e-reader screen. Back before they had wireless capacity, I've routed it through an interpretation matrix to allow the AI to communicate with us via texts." "Okay, color me impressed. And how do we..." I pointed timidly at the box. "It has a mic. We can speak to it. It can't use audio. I didn't know what its capabilities were, so I didn't want to risk it." "Fair call. Is it on?" She pointed to a red safety switch. "Not yet. Wanted to make sure we were all here before I hit go." My heart thumping, I didn't know why. Maybe it was because no one had talked to a fully sentient AI, officially, in decades. Who knew how it was going to react? Would it know that I was the one who had killed its owner, programmer, human? Well, no time like the present. My heart rate was starting to gather some speed, and I didn't quite know why. She leant forward, flipped the safety cover off, and waited for a dramatic second, then hit the switch. Nothing happened. Not straight away. The screen flickered. Not the whole thing, just the area that was about to display text. Like it had gone negative, then set the black e-ink text in place. It didn't appear one letter at a time like someone typing. The whole sentence manifested all at once on the screen. Plain text. Basic. "Jules, it's dark." We all sat frozen. I looked at Fia. She shook her head. Reva caught my eye and nodded to the screen. Oh yeah, suddenly it was up to me. No. Sorry, Jules isn't here." A pause. A flicker of e-ink. "I need Jules." "I'm sorry, Jules is gone." Another pause as it computed this. "Am I alone?" That was unexpected. I thought it would ask where she was, when she would return. I was going to ease into the fact that she was dead. Who knew how it would react? No, Jules is gone. But I'm here. "Who are you?" Somebody who needs your help. I stopped, considering. I opted for friendly. What's your name? It pleased Jules to call me Eve. Of course, how original. I was glad it couldn't see my face as I rolled my eyes. You know when I say Jules is gone, I mean... The text appeared before I could finish talking. She is deceased, yes. She was deleted by another entity. That was one way of putting it. Do you know who did it? A break in the conversation. It must have been a bit scrambled from the fight. It was probably searching its memory banks. No, my memory is corrupted. Well, that was something. I know who was responsible. What I want to know, though, is what do you want to do with that information? I could have bet money on the answer. I knew what the gist of it would be, but the manner in which Eve replied sent chills down my spine. Jagged letters, like they'd been carved out of stone, spread across the screen as though it had shattered from the inside. It was the closest thing to emotion it could convey. A font so confronting and violent, I actually leant back as they flashed across the screen. I want to delete their everything. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. New episodes uploaded every second Saturday. Script and narration by JJ Brandis. Music was provided by Cale McLeish. Copyright JJ Brandis 2025.